You are not going to believe this one. Sit down, grab popcorn, get ready. Simone Sanders is now on MSNBC advocating for a movement around class. She's literally on MSNBC now advocating for organizing around class issues, as if this never happened. Now, all of a sudden, this matters. I kid you not. I saw this clip and I thought I was going to lose it. Like I thought I was going to lose it. And I'm pretty sure anybody that was a part of the Bernie Sanders movement, you're probably thinking to yourself, you're going to lose it as well. Because you see, what is happening now is that because Kamala Harris lost the presidential election and Donald Trump won again, Democratic Party strategists are sitting back and they're like, how in the world did this guy win again when he lost in 2020? Yeah, he won in 2016, but how in the hell did we get here, right? And there have been a number of us in independent media that were right about this issue all along, which is that the Democratic Party is not trying to do things for the working class in this country. They are starting to realize that the platform that Bernie Sanders had actually was the right way to go to build up the working class. Now, we can add things to this. Like I said that Bernie Sanders should have had a reparations plan, should have had a Black agenda. But they did not want to accept that at that point in time. But because of the loss and the way that Kamala Harris lost, now they are starting to say, okay, well, maybe we need to entertain other ideas. Don't forget also that MSNBC, along with CNN, they experienced a significant drop in ratings after the presidential election. Meanwhile, some of us in independent media continue to grow. So they are starting to see that, or at least the management and the shareholders are starting to see, hey, you're losing money. We're losing money. You got to do something about this here. So let's start with this clip here of David Hogg. You might remember him. He was an activist. He was a part of March for Our Lives. He is now considering running for the DNC vice chair. And he was on this panel with Simone Sanders, Michael Steele, and this other woman, I always forget her name, talking about how the Democratic Party needs to change and needs to give more voice to younger people. Let's start with that. And then we're going to get to this class issue, because this is a doozy.
And it's good to see you, bro.
Good to see you, David.
I appreciate the fact that you're doing this. I really appreciate the fact that you are holding people to the idea of transitional leadership. Began in 20, and I think it culminates after this election in someone like you stepping up to the plate. What are you hearing in the Democratic Party from young people that gives your candidacy the energy it will need to overcome, let's be honest, some folks who are like, I don't think we need a 24-year-old vice chairman of the party. And it's not about the age, it's about what that 24-year-old is bringing to the table. And you have an opportunity to bring a very important constituency to that table. Talk about that.
Well, for one, I think that there's a real reckoning that's happening in the Democratic Party, unfortunately, because of the 20-point shift to the right of 18 to 29-year-old voters that we saw in this election. And when I was in the audience at the executive committee meeting at the DNC a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and their pollster was talking about why we lost the election, the first thing that they brought up was 18 to 29-year-old voters. And I looked around the room and I basically saw nobody else that looked like me in terms of my age, under the age of 30. And
pause right there. He said he was in the room. These Democrat strategists said one of the reasons why we lost the election was the voters that are ages 18 to 30. Not Black voters. Do you see that they're still unwilling to admit that they lost the Black vote? They're still unwilling to acknowledge this, that they have continued to decline with the Black vote since Obama. It decreased for Hillary, decreased for Biden, decreased even more for Kamala Harris. Just wanted to put that out there. They don't want to acknowledge that.
And we can raise all the money that we want, but that's not going to change the fact that if we don't have the types of voters in the room that we're trying to target, a lot of that money very likely is going to be mistargeted. And surprisingly, there's been a lot of good support from older people as well across the party, where there's a reckoning and an understanding that there's a need for intergenerational leadership with the wisdom of people from the past, but with the fresh ideas of people from my generation as well, and building that coalition and diversity into our party. Because right now, in terms of the age diversity of the DNC, currently less than 6% of the entire body of voting members are under the age of 36, which is insane compared to how much our party actually relies on them to build our power.
David.
Now, I agree with him that the Democratic Party does ignore a significant age demographic. They do. I told you before that some of these people need to retire. Nancy Pelosi needs to retire. Chuck Schumer needs to retire. That's not going to happen without term limits. So I agree that there should be term limits in Congress. That being said, I think the one thing that David is not mentioning is the impact of donor money. Like these Democrat Party leaders are just doing what their donors want them to do. That's how this works. You know? So it's like, we give money to you, you get elected, you serve our interests. That's how it works. If there was no corporate money in electoral politics, I think you would see a very different Congress. I really do. Let's go on a little bit more here.
You talked about voters 18 to 29. I want to pull up for you what the gender split looked like in this past election. This is from an NBC exit polls of the 2024 presidential. You had men 18 to 29 breaking for Donald Trump, 49%. Women, same age, breaking for Harris, 61%. Talk about young people generally. When you talk about young men, what do you need to do to make up those numbers?
I think we need to end the false dichotomy that says that we need to either focus on young men or focus on young women. Our young men are struggling around the country. There is a mental health crisis, there is an educational crisis, and there's a whole litany of other issues that we have to address, and realize that that is not to say that we don't need to care about young women. We obviously do, but it's to say that we need to care about both, because what's good for both is what's good for young men, and making sure that they're graduating at higher rates, that we're addressing their mental health, that we're doing much more to address the loneliness epidemic that young men are facing, is good for young women and vice versa. And we need to make sure that we aren't going into that false dichotomy, because I know that we were in the lead up to the election. When I talked to younger voters, or not even just younger voters, but when I was part of the National Finance Committee for Harris, and I asked in front of the committee, as one of the youngest people in that room who helped them raise several $100,000 for the campaign, what are we doing about young men? I was told by other people from the committee that I was ridiculous, that this was not something that we needed to focus on, and it was absurd.
Pause. Everybody hear what they just said there? So this speaks to the point that Nina Turner made when she said that the Democratic Party emasculates men. I think in her terms, she was saying specifically black men, but did you hear what he just said? We don't need to focus on men. So this speaks to, again, the Democratic Party always choosing to focus on identity, but not do anything really for that identity. Like, it was obvious this election, there was a lot of push towards women. Like, we gotta get the women, to come out and save women's rights and rah, and all that kind of stuff. And there is a whole other demographic that is also voting as well. This is what the Democratic Party does, right? This is what they do. They find it, and sometimes it's a different group, but the reality is they find a group to cater to, but they don't actually do anything when they're in office to help that group. Typical playbook. Black voters walking away, men walking away from the Democratic Party. This has continued to be the case since Obama ended his second term. Since Obama ended his second term, this has continued to be the case. And it's increased. But you can't tell them anything. Because, see, this is what has happened. Because they have tried to, let's just win based on identity politics, because that is what the Democratic Party has tried to go with. Now, if they pivot from that now it could end up being a case where some of those groups that are part of the identity that the Democratic Party tried to use in order to win might get a little pissed off. If the Democratic Party now all of a sudden says, we are not going to focus on, these issues, we're not going to focus on these identity issues, and we're going to focus on more economics, etc. Yes, we're still going to advocate for social justice. I say advocate because they don't really do anything about it. But we are not going to try to win elections based on identity alone. If they do this, now what's going to happen is some of these different groups are going to become upset. But this is the hole that the Democratic Party dug for themselves. This is the hole that they've dug for themselves. They have no one to blame but them.
To even care about that. And then unfortunately saw one of the largest shifts, mainly powered by young men to the right, in over 20 years of Democratic, in 20 years of elections history. And if we don't start to acknowledge this problem, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to get worse, not only for our party, but for people across the country, because men are going to keep going more and more to the right.
David, up until I went to work in the White House in the first year of the Biden administration, I was a DNC member. And so I'm interested in what are the conversations you've had with DNC members? Have you met with any of the caucus chairs? And have you met the threshold to officially be on the ballot? I believe it was 40 signatures needed from DNC members. Do you have those?
So yes, as of right now, I have 42 signatures that I've obtained, and I'm going to continue getting more just in case there's any changes in people being members when they signed versus when they didn't, just to be as safe as possible. But I have had many conversations with different members of the caucuses, with the Southern Caucus and others. And what I repeatedly hear that's striking from many of these conversations, frankly, is how many people feel like they're props in the DNC, that they're just a rubber stamp, that they aren't actually there to be incorporated or listened to as voting members, that they're just there sitting around in these meetings and aren't really being asked for help. A lot of the time, other than every 4 years when somebody needs their vote to be elected to the DNC and, to an officer role, for example. And part of what's striking to me is how there's just a severe lack of investment in our state parties, and how we have this boom and bust cycle as a party where we have a multi-billion-dollar presidential race come up every 4 years, and we build all this infrastructure all of a sudden from nothing, practically. And we're having people go from blue states into states like Michigan, living in places like Detroit, where in neighborhoods that they don't know anything outside of a Wikipedia page. And what we need to do, in my opinion, is take this money that we're able to raise as a party and invest it more in our state parties to build sustainable infrastructure, so that it's not just a boom and bust cycle, but every single year, every single election, no matter if it's a local election, a special election, or a federal election, there are people there that know their communities, that are organizing for the communities and delivering and showing how Democrats are delivering for their communities. Because what's scary to me is increasingly our party is not looking like the working class, it is looking like the consulting class.
Because that's what it is. The people that he was referring to that feel like they're a part of the DNC and they're just sitting around and no one is asking them for help, they're window dressing. they're there, but they're not really there to do anything. And that's exactly the way that the donors want it. So when David says the Democratic Party looks like the consulting class, it doesn't look like it. It is. That's what it became. It's not the party of the working class. The Republican Party isn't the party of the working class either, despite what some people would allow you to believe. I think people are seeing that now with this whole debate over the H-1B visas. So now all of a sudden, all these conversations are happening on corporate media again, because these are the conversations that those of us in independent media have been having for years. And I am newer to this. I mean, I started in 2021. There are commentators, independent media that have been talking about these issues for 8 years. So corporate media chose to ignore those things. And now to make things worse, Simone Sanders is out here all of a sudden pretending like she's having an epiphany about what should be done to help people. Simone Sanders who worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016, then saw that wasn't really going in the direction that would really help her career. Somehow she was able to pivot from that and join to be part of the Biden campaign. Really interesting, considering many of the people that worked with Bernie Sanders' campaign couldn't get a job in DC to save their lives after that. So very interesting how that worked out for her. But Simone Sanders went from Bernie 2016, jumped into Joe Biden's campaign, was hoping that he would make her press secretary. Didn't happen. He chose Jen Psaki. And then she went on to get this gig at MSNBC. Now, all of a sudden, all these years, while Biden was in office and she was defending Joe Biden, she lied to the American people about his mental ability. She lied to about American people about his cognitive decline. She lied to the American people about where he stood on the crime bill. She tried to defend that. She lied to the American people over and over again, anything to protect Joe Biden, when many of us that supported Bernie and voted for Bernie were still trying to press these issues, these progressive issues that you need to help build up the working class. People need help in this country. She shut it down. And she knew that that was the right message because she came from Bernie 2016, but she shut it down in order to maintain this gig here on MSNBC, which is a sinking ship. Corporate media is dying. Listen to this. All of a sudden, she pretends to have this epiphany.
Well, and that is why I made the point yesterday about people often talk about, this has literally been going on since Fred Hampton, but Reverend Jesse Jackson, Dr. King, right? Heck, Bernie Sanders talked about organizing across class as well, because the reality is when you align just along, if we're going to just specifically talk about white people for a second, okay? If we just talk about aligning just across race, we are seeing the divisions happening right now. The white billionaires, Elon Musk is not saying, yes, I'm fighting for the little guy. Yes, I'm out here, looking out for the forgotten white man.
Let's go back. If you're ready to pull your hair out, I totally understand. Totally understand. This woman, she smeared Bernie Sanders in 2020 because she was a part of the Biden team at that point. She smeared Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2020. Now, all of a sudden, she's like, well, like Bernie Sanders talked about. You have not talked about these issues or advocated for these issues since you left that campaign in 2016. Defended Joe Biden at every chance. Listen again.
Well, and that is why I made the point yesterday about people often talk about, this has literally been going on since Fred Hampton, but Reverend Jesse Jackson, Dr. King.
Now, all of a sudden, it's okay to mention Fred Hampton. Now, all of a sudden, it's okay for MSNBC to advocate for what Fred Hampton did. Does everybody see what's happening here? If you think that they're not paying attention to independent media, you are wrong. Simone Sanders, all of these corporate media pundits, they watch us just like we watch them. They know what's being said. Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to come forward and say, oh, Bernie had the right idea. All of a sudden, corporate media is okay. Of course, he's not running anymore. But while this was happening, you were smearing it. And Simone Sanders was a part of that, a huge part of that. So if you can't see, and don't call it a turncoat, we're not calling her a turncoat. This is an act. If you can't see the act that these commentators are doing, that's part of the problem. It's performative. It's performative. I don't understand how these people sleep at night. Like, I really don't. Let's go on.
Right? Heck, Bernie Sanders talked about organizing across class as well, because the reality is when you align just along, if we're going to just specifically talk about white people for a second, okay?
She smeared all of this in 2020. All of this in 2020. Now, my take to this, and as I said before, I said Bernie Sanders still should have had a reparations plan to go along with this. He still should have had a black agenda. But all of these people who are coming forward to push this message now smeared this message in 2020. And some of them smeared it as well in 2016. So Simone Sanders should be absolutely ashamed of herself. You can't sit back here now and all of a sudden go, oh, well, it's just like Bernie Sanders talked about. If you really believe that, Simone, why did you hop on the Biden campaign? If you know this, Simone Sanders, why did you hop on the Biden campaign? Knowing it was not about those issues. So if this doesn't go to show you that they're just looking out for their careers, these people make a lot of money, fam. Don't sit back here thinking that, oh, they're just everyday workers. No, they're not. These people that you see on MSNBC, that you see on CNN, they make a lot of money. More than many of you will ever make. So this shows you just as much of a fraud. This is the fraud. This shows you how Simone Sanders has been nothing but a complete fraud. They're actors. Stop calling them journalists. Hell, I don't even call myself a journalist. Stop calling these people journalists. They're actors, paid actors.
If we just talk about aligning just across race, we are seeing the divisions happening right now. The white billionaires, Elon Musk is not saying, yes, I'm fighting for the little guy. Yes, I'm out here, looking out for the forgotten white man.
Now, all of a sudden, it's okay to criticize the billionaires after you told people that they needed to jump on board of a campaign that had billionaire money. Now, all of a sudden, it's okay to criticize the billionaires. Does everybody see the play that is in front of us? Shakespeare said that the world is a stage. We are literally sitting in an audience at a theater, and these are the actors on stage, and they'll be there until the curtain call. That's all this is. You can't even really call it news anymore. It's just entertainment. Entertainment.
He is saying these folks are mediocre and let me get somebody else to do it, which is why folks, white, black, Latino, Native American, Asian American, and Pacific Islander and otherwise, we have to look at organizing across class.
We need to look at organizing across class. I bet you Breonna Joy Gray is pulling her hair out. I bet you the organizers for the marches for Medicare for All are pulling their hair out. We did organize along class lines. We've been organizing along class lines. But let me tell you something. Don't get it twisted. What Simone Sanders is trying to do is she's advocating for this to happen within the Democratic Party. Right? To that, we did that too. Didn't we organize along class lines for the Bernie Sanders campaigns? Isn't that what that was about? With Nina Turner, Cornel West, Danny Glover, all these people that came together to organize. Didn't we do that? What is she talking about? Why is she pretending like this was not done when she was a part of it in 2016? Right? So this is the play. May not be a Shakespeare play, but this is the play. This is the play that's right in front of all of us right now. These people have no shame. No shame. You can go sit down, Simone. Don't come out here all of a sudden pretending like, oh, let me tell people what they need to do when people have been doing it for years. There were marches in over 50 cities in this country for Medicare for All. That was about 3 years ago. I was an MC at the Boston one. There were a number of people that participated in these marches. I think Susan Sarandon was a speaker at the New York City march. Where were you, Simone? When all those marches for Medicare for All were happening across the country, why weren't you there covering it? Hey, you don't want to be in the street? Why didn't you mention it? Why didn't MSNBC mention any of those marches? That was organizing along class lines. Where were you? Oh, I forgot. You were defending Joe Biden. That's what you were doing. So I don't want to hear it now. I don't want to hear it now. You guys got to understand these people are not genuine. They're not being genuine. They're saying this because they realize, okay, there's a pain right now. Donald Trump won the popular vote. Let's try to, send this message that we do understand that there does need to be some type of, uplifting of the working class. But mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, come the next presidential election, they are going to have you get in line for whoever the donor class wants the nominee to be, whether they have a working class agenda or not. That's how it works. This message that Simone Sanders is sending is just to make you feel better. Everybody see how this works? They're trying to make you feel like they're going to do something different. They're not. As long as the money is attached, they're not. But this is to make you feel better. We'll finish this up here. Jesus.
Okay, because the reality is what they said, as Michael said, what they said about black people all those years ago, and they still trying to say it about us, to be very clear. Now they're saying it out loud about people who are not black, about you, okay? First they came for us, now they're coming for you. You are not exempt, boo-boo. Let's come together.
I couldn't have said it better. Church on Sunday morning. Still ahead.
So fake, so fraudulent. And I really don't know how Simone Sanders sleeps at night. How can you sit there and say these things after you have pushed against it for the past 4 years? You pushed against any type of thing like this. That paycheck must be really nice. So if you were a part of the Bernie movement, I'm pretty sure you're probably very angry about this statement. These people have no shame. This is why I continue to debunk corporate media and to call out corporate media, because they are controlled. Look at the shareholders. Who's a shareholder of MSNBC? Look at the shareholders. Look at the donors. And then you'll understand why. These people, 9 times out of 10, are not writing their own commentary. They're going with the narrative that they are told is okay to discuss. So for Simone Sanders to sit here and to pretend as though this was not happening for years, she should be appalled. She should have shame, but she does not. Simone is doing what she is paid to do. And that's what you guys have to understand. Do not get it twisted. This is a trick. Do not fall for this. These people have absolutely no intention of pushing for that working class candidate, that class coalition candidate, because if they did, they would have been doing it all along. This message is to make you feel better and to make you feel like that the Democratic Party may be moving in that direction. Honey, the donors say something different. And until you get corporate money out of electoral politics, that party is not going to change, just like the Republican Party is not going to change. So they're actors. We're in the audience and they're on stage. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.